crowd. So why don't we get rolling? Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. This is Dean Smith from HPRCT, and I'm thrilled that you all took the time to join us in our webinars today. Just a couple of quick logistics before I introduce our presenter for the day. As always, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to raise your hand to join into the conversation, ask a question, chat a Q&A into the Q&A panel or into the chat box. And the other critical logistic thing is we are going to try to wrap up 5 minutes before the hour because we have 2 webinars back to back and each has a different login. So for those of you that are joining the second one and for us as hosts, we need to segue between the two sessions. So we'll get rolling now. We'll wrap up about 5 minutes before the hour. And I'm thrilled to introduce Rob Fisher, CEO and Director of Operations for Fisher Improvement Technologies. And Rob has kindly volunteered to talk us through some wisdom around doing HOP right in our new world. So with that, Rob, it's all yours.
Appreciate it, Dean, and thank you everybody for having me, and good day wherever you are. As Dean said, my name's Rob Fisher. I own a company called Fisher Improvement Technologies. We've spent the last 30 years helping people understand really how and why people make mistakes, especially mistakes that could prove to be catastrophic. Between ourselves and our consultants, we've got about 150 years of consulting on HOP, human performance, HPI, whatever you want to call it, this part of this decade. We've been talking about human error, the prevention of human error, the mitigation of human error, and the correction when human errors occur. We've really worked all over the world, but most of our business has been face-to-face. If an organization has risk, we've been involved somewhere in the world. So that's all changed. It doesn't matter that we've done all of that stuff. It doesn't matter what really worked a year ago. Now we're going on 10, 11 months of a new world, of things changing. And so it's great to have all that history and it's great to have all that experience, but that piece of being good at delivering and being good at getting the results out there in the world, that's all changed. And you have to do a shift now because the need to do HOP is still there. And I was this guy. The way you teach HOP, the way you do it right is you do it face to face. You got to be looking them in the eye. It is human in organizational performance. And I was the guy that was saying, look, so nobody wants to sit there at a computer and learn about HP. And remember, this is coming from somebody that's done over 300 deployments in 40 countries in 10 languages. We've had about 350,000 students go through our program globally. And so we started thinking, okay, so maybe we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But was I ever wrong about the way people would learn or would be interested in learning about human and organizational performance? And I want to share a little bit of that with you today, and then maybe generate some thoughts and some questions on some of the things that you're doing as well, because we had to shift or die. That's the easy way to think about it. But I'm sure there's human and organizational performance coordinators out there in businesses that are suffering a little bit of the same way. So I want to talk a little bit about what has changed, and I want to talk about what hasn't, because we really can't believe that everything has to be different. I'm going to give you a few insights of how some things are working in this new world, and then maybe some discussion about where we go from here. So some of the things that we have to remember are, if you look at these 2 pictures and what they have in common, and then I'm going to add one more, and that is the helicopter. Well, for hundreds of thousands and probably millions of years, the hummingbird and the bumblebee have been able to fly. The physics have been there. But we didn't understand those physics until about the last 100 years, whether it's fixed wing flight or or helicopters, we started being able to apply the physics and the understanding that's been around for hundreds of thousands of generations. It's the same way with human and organizational performance. The way our brains work has not substantively changed. Every neurological study that's happening is showing that we are adapting a little bit, but it's a little bit. It's not globally changing. So we have to take into account that we're still dealing with humans, and the base way that humans are wired hasn't substantively changed. But leaders still have to know and do HOP. And all of that starts with leader knowledge. You know, Sidney Decker and I had a great conversation one day, and he said one of the things that we've gotten good at is shifting people's paradigms. And if you want to shift someone's paradigm, you have to give them a paradigm more powerful than the one you're asking them to leave. Well, we've been asking leaders to do that, but have you really been giving them a more powerful paradigm than what you're asking them to leave? Well, now's your opportunity, because we're having to shift our paradigm from what we used to do with employee training and everything else, with what we used to do with trying to shift the leader knowledge, language, and behaviors to the point that we can actually get the workforce language and behavior changes that we need. Remember, the workforce is out there still doing their thing. Some of those folks are doing their thing at home. Some of them are doing their thing in a closed office. But most of the workers that we're talking that might get hurt, maimed, and killed are getting hurt, maimed, and killed out in the same field they were out in before COVID. So we have to think about the engagement piece. We call this the gear model. And the engagement piece, if it is too loose, you get slippage. If it's too tight, you get friction. But what you really want are those better outcomes. The need for better outcomes has not changed. So leaders still have to know and do HOP. But what has changed? Well, one of the things that's changed, oh, wait, no. Well, no, the worker language, the worker behavior and language expectations, those haven't changed. We would still expect them to get better. Let's see. Oh, wait. No, the outcomes, they haven't changed. Our outcome demands are still the same as they were before. So what has changed is how we develop leaders. How do you teach them? And how do you make sure that they understand what their role is? So if some of us thought that leaders felt like they were a little bit segregated or a little bit divorced or a little bit away from human and organizational performance before, think about how they feel now. Another thing that has changed is that the way they exhibit those language and behaviors may have changed. You know, we're not around. We can't walk in their offices like we used to in some cases. Even if we can, our social interactions, the way they exhibit those characteristics when they go out into the field, maybe they're masked up now. Maybe they've got a face shield on now. Maybe they're not used to that social interaction, the social distancing. The way they exhibit those knowledge and language and behavior changes has changed, and we have to adapt to that piece. And the other thing that has changed is the way and the places that leaders engage, how they engage. You know, very often leaders can now engage just like we're engaging right now. That is very different than walking out and engaging. It doesn't take away the need, but it takes away the location and the methodology. So when we're talking about human and organizational performance, we're talking about the interface of humans. We have to now adapt what we do with leaders to help that. But
Hey,
you know,
Rob,
yeah.
I'm going to just interrupt you for a second because we have a couple questions. Is it a convenient time to take a couple?
Absolutely. Anytime is convenient.
Perfect. And I'm going to start with Chris England, who's had his had a hand raised for just a couple of minutes. So, Chris, what's your question? Oh, and trying to find Chris again. Chris, your hand was up, but so we will move on to one that came into the Q&A. So Michael asked about, Rob, would you say that the work environment has changed? For example, less leadership engagement at the job site?
Yes, 100%. And that's two or threefold, and I won't try to explain all of them. But
Okay.
remember, you had leaders that didn't like engaging anyway, and now they have an excuse not to.
Not to.
I've got all these other things that are going on. I've got all my Zoom meetings backed up to back to back to back. I'm trying to do everything. I'm at home. So you have leaders that now have a convenient excuse not to be out there. You have other leaders that when they go out there, they really want to be out there and they want to be social and they want to be with the crews, but they can't be there the way they used to be in both time and in function. In other words, now I'm wearing a mask, so you can't really tell anything about what my emotions are. I'm having to stay socially distanced when I like to pat some people on the back. So absolutely that work environment related to leaders engaging has changed. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it probably did. And it's an interesting one that has a lot of tentacles into like emotional intelligence and how leaders actually communicate in a really genuine, sincere way and connect with
really
people.
does.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
So the need for systems thinking hasn't really changed, but this is almost an extension of the answer to the other question. The system that people are working in is changing. You know, we've known for decades now that most of the problems in industry are related to human error. In other words, people make mistakes. That's still the case. So you still have people out there, they're still touching things. When they touch things right, we applaud. When they touch things wrong, we say, oh no. That part of people being out there in the field or people being at home or people driving, that hasn't changed. So the science behind understanding human error hasn't changed either, but the delivery has. So now we've got to get people interested in how I can reduce my probability or how I can mitigate consequences in a way that was different than Rob and Chris sitting across the table from each other or getting some training with some experiential learning. You know, it's not like you can put a star simulator in somebody's Zoom meeting. Well, you actually can, but it's done differently. So the need hasn't changed, just the delivery. That system that people are operating in has always been a dynamic system. On any task at any time, people are surrounded by other people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment. What we have to teach people to do in a different way is to look at that system for the way things are now, not the way things used to be. Because the way things are now is only going to change in a different direction. It's not going to go back the way it was. This is no new normal. There's no normality about what we're doing. You know, Todd and I have been working on some bouncing forward elements. How do we come out of this ahead of where we came in instead of behind? So people still have to understand the individual drivers, and like someone was asking, is that changing? Well, yeah, the work environment changes, the people you're around might change, the equipment you have to use might change. So the systemic drivers, we still need to teach people to look for those. We still need to help them with that interdependent system. Our job is to get people to use the system to minimize the probability they're going to make a mistake. But we've got to do that differently than we've ever done it before. Before, we could sit down in a classroom maybe or stand out at the tailboard and have those discussions. We have to find new and better ways to do that. And I'm going to pause for 5 seconds for questions.
Yeah, so let's see if we get any hands raised.
Okay.
And looks like, yeah, Marcello, your hand was up. So you should be able to go ahead and ask your question, or I might have to unmute you. Yeah, Marcello.
Hi, hello.
There we go.
Oh, thank you so much. I have a question about change. You know, I believe that sometimes we understand change, you know, like a behavior consequence, no? but the behaviorist school, no, sometimes is very limited, no. And my question is, if it change depends of personal experience, and the person by themselves has to conclude the value to change, no, and not specifically that you have to wait change in the leadership style or messages, but I believe that change is a long-term process, no, and depends on a personal knowledge and convincement to change. You know, that's the question. You know, between behavior school and the Freud school, not that you have other aspects of psychologies behind. You know, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I will tell you that using the systems approach has driven pretty substantive change pretty quickly. Not all of the model, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And it's the same with the behavioral sciences. So I'm just sharing with you what has worked, hundreds of thousands of times to get people to want to change, because that piece of the guiding principles that performance is based on awareness, that's self-awareness, reinforcement, are we all talking about that? And self-motivation, how do I get to want to do it? If you do hop right, people want to do it because it works for them, not because you're telling them to do it. So the guiding principles are fine. We still have to tell people about those, but they take on a little bit different meaning when you start asking questions like you just asked. If I get you to shift your paradigm, it's going to be much easier for you to want to change. And we've seen that across the board. Well, that shift was almost tectonic when we had to start doing things virtual, because you had people that were what some people may call seasoned employees, or old like me. I don't know how to work those newfangled electronics. Well, if the only way you can talk to your safety rep is on a Zoom meeting, you by golly learn how to Zoom pretty quickly. And it's amazing to watch what has happened. Well, now I can have those conversations, and oddly enough, where I wouldn't have called that safety rep before, I'm now self-motivated to hit that Zoom button, call the safety rep, says, can you spend 2 minutes with me? Let me show you what I'm looking at. That would have never happened before. But if you open those doors, that change seems to happen pretty quick. So I think, Marcello, you have to give people a paradigm that's more powerful than the one you're asking them to leave, and then change is not a big deal in any of the behavior elements. So I don't try to hit one of them, because I understand that all parts of all of them are right. So the basic understandings haven't changed either. You still need to teach that. There's still a, Deming's principle. In any industrial process, if there's a problem, there's a 90% certainty that problem is systemic in nature, not individual in nature. Fix the system, you fix it for good. Fix the individual, you only fix it for now. That's still true. 95% of humans still react very similarly physiologically to the same stimuli. That's still true. People do what they do at the time they do it for reasons that make sense to them at the time. That's still true, and it still ain't common sense. So you have to shift leaders away from that common sense argument, or they should have known, or everybody knows. I will tell you this, that has been a little bit easier in a world where the leaders don't go out looking for problems because they can't be going out sometimes. That piece about it kind of reducing hindsight bias has actually been better now than it was before, when the leaders were always out there looking for a problem. And by the way, when they went out looking for problems, those problems tend to fit their biases, and they would call that common sense. But the world has kind of shown us that there's no real common sense. Common sense is your belief that I should believe the way you believe on whatever the hell it is we're talking about. And if that was true here in the States, I know we've got some international folks on as well. Here in the States, MSNBC and Fox couldn't sit next to each other on the TV if there was any common sense, because they both think they have it, and their followers all think they have it. Well, those are all biases that we can deal with and we need to deal with in the way that we educate people. But one of the things that you can do is you can put a whole lot of electronics behind it. So you notice down here in the bottom, we have on the slide where they can go get information when we're done. So all of those links would be available. And now instead of coming to a training, sitting there for 8 hours, having a workbook, not wanting to carry it around, or having a pocket guide, which I routinely carry around with me, this can now be electronic. And anything that I need is one touch away. And anything that I need is one link away from watching a short video on what it is that we talked about in class 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 weeks ago. We still have to stick with the science. We still have to get people to understand those definitions, because if you don't, and what I'm trying to do is keep the things in that you can't throw away, even though you're not going to have the same amount of time. We still need people to learn to separate events and errors, and errors and violations. We still need to talk about how bad things happen and what the probabilities are. But what that's allowed us to do is to now start teaching the leaders where this stuff came from and then linking those elements. So it used to be we would try to teach people stuff, and as HOP practitioners, we were the expert. But now we can call the experts in, and we can provide shareable links to everything that we tell them. So if they don't want to believe us, they can go read, if they want to go read human error and try and interpret it differently, they can go for it. They're probably not going to want to. But now it's not just us mentioning that that's where it came from. It's providing that information. But it's also about thinking about things like near misses and near hits, and good catches, and where those tend to fall. But when leader language and behavior doesn't shift, near misses and near hits are what suffers. So what suffers is organizational learning. If they haven't shifted their belief on errors, violations, and deviations, near misses, near hits, deviations, and violations, that all follows. So now you can actually put that into the way leaders are educated and the way they're tested. Oh, and there is one more thing, and that's that sometimes the people that are requesting, demanding, reviewing categories, analyzing, and making recommendations for these improvements, some of our root cause analysts, we've conducted multiple root cause mentorings that we're doing virtually. I never even would consider that possible. But the possible becomes probable and possible when the impossible starts to overtake you. What do? Not review the damn root cause? What do? Not do interviews because you can't fly to California? No, absolutely not. But we've gotten used to this conversation. But remember, if the people that are normally out there that would be driving things like near misses and near hits and good catches aren't out there, you have to find a way to stay on top of people to get those things to happen. If a person in the field believes that somebody's going to be sitting at their house helping their kids do Zoom class while they're evaluating your near miss, they're just going to not put the near miss in. So we have to help them deal with that piece that we never had to deal with before. And it's not a numbers game. So again, I'm going to pause 5 seconds and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so we'll see if any hands pop up. Heather, I saw yours pop up earlier and then it went away. So I don't know if you have a question. But while we're waiting, Rob, if you go back to your previous slide, so it seems like we might get, for those people recommending improvements who are sitting at home, there may be more of an unbiased and objective way that they're looking at information. But, to your point, I guess it seems like there could be less near miss, near hit info coming in from field locations, from people. So is that accurate? Is that a fair set of assumptions?
Yes, it's actually both of them. You know, where Dean may be sitting at home and not have any distractions and have all of the resources that you normally wouldn't have out in the field available to you, and the time. You know, I've found myself when I work from home, or you know, I actually do get to come into the office because we're socially distanced, but I have that I'll work a lot longer than if I had to go out and spot check the field and then drive an hour home. So I think that we have to explain those advantages to people, and then you'll start getting they'll believe that that's going to be helpful for them.
Yeah, they'll believe
that self-motivation.
Right. I imagine you see more actionable insights coming out of that focused kind of work, right?
Exactly.
Thank you. And let's see, any more hands popping up here? Not yet, Rob. So let's keep rolling.
So if you think about the Swiss cheese model, and I know it's a linear model, the way I want you to think about it in our new world is, what about these things down here? How has the communication changed with the people that are actually developing your layers of protection? How are we managing those communications, both with the field and the intercommunications for developing, managing, verifying these layers of protection? The fact that we need layers of protection hasn't changed. The way we need to talk about it in human and organizational performance has had to change, because if you just look at the way that circle sits, almost everything in the Swiss cheese model needs to be communicated and developed in a little bit different way than it was a year ago, except for the worker behaviors. And if you still give those worker behaviors the system, you know, back again to Marcello's point, if you still give them the system to look at, that system drives them to see all the things around them that would influence their behavior. But that's not necessarily the case with all the rest of the Swiss cheese model. Performance modes. People are still going to shift in and out of skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based performance mode. They still need to know what those are. They still need to understand it's about this person on this task at this time. But there are so many ways to talk about performance modes in our world today, with rules changing. Are we really in rule-based performance mode with some of the rules associated with COVID? Or are we in knowledge-based performance mode? We think we know that this is going to work. But remember, we've been taught that when we're in knowledge-based performance mode to stop and seek out help, and we don't know that the help we're seeking out is actually moving us to rule-based performance mode. Use this opportunity to have these conversations, because what you can do is you can now involve the families. Do you really want to risk something as bad as COVID and being in knowledge-based performance mode? For your spouse, your significant or insignificant other, for your children, for your parents that may be in a nursing home. You can use these opportunities to, again, to help give people a self-motivation, because they can use this information in their day-to-day lives. Remember the information on performance modes and the task-based system. They don't know where they're at, home, work, school, play, and they don't know what they're doing. Quality, safety, effectiveness, efficiency, productivity. So we now have an opportunity to load up on a whole bunch of those examples. It's time to start weaving system 1 and system 2 thinking in. So again, we're being provided an opportunity to give the workforce things to understand and why they should do it, because really, if still today, if they use the right tool the right way, they get an error rate reduction by a factor of 10. But we also need to teach managers why it's important for them. And this includes performance modes, traps, triggers, tools. All of those things still exist. We just have to have a way to talk about it differently. I think a lot of us had this down when we were face to face, when we were doing train the trainer, trainer prep, trainer cert, doing cause analysis, doing prevention. And we learned a lot from that. Now we've got to consolidate it in ways that we present it appropriately, because people are still experiencing the traps out there, but the traps are magnified by the conditions that they're in. So if you think about what's going on with COVID in the workplace, do you think it adds any stress, any distractions? Do you think there's more people coming back from first working day back because they had to take 10 days off because they thought they were exposed? Communications has struggled. We're trying to rely on written guidance that we used when everybody was around, and use that written guidance, and it's not working the way it was when there was somebody standing right there. Infrequent or first time tasks, the first time that we've done a whole bunch of things, right? It may be the first time a utility person has had to climb a pole and use certain protective equipment that they never had to use before. So these error traps, you got to know what they look like, what they feel like, what they'll do to you, and what you can do about them. And what you can do about them is use things like the WIF model, work environment, individual capabilities, task demands, and human nature. But when you teach this, when you educate this, and when you test this, it's that individual capability to task demand mismatch that becomes important. So, you know, there's no better time to start putting this together for people than now. You can start to really put it together in ways that, you know, we could never have 10-minute classes before, but we can now. I mean, we probably have 100 less than 5-minute free videos up on our website that explain almost everything in the whole spectrum of HOP. Why can't we get people to stop work? So our way of delivering the information can be more permanent, and it can be on the topic that somebody needs in the moment. We never had that before. You know, we complicated tools, or we overcomplicated them. And so now we can simplify the tools to the way people need to hear them. And then they can go right back to those tools.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt again, but we've got a couple questions and comments, which I think are intriguing. So I'm just going to, I'll read them out to you. One had to do with your communication slide, and just, you know, about methods. What are some communications methods that that we need to think about or maybe use differently? Because virtual communications can be different with different people. Maybe some have webcams, some don't.
Yeah.
And we need to develop skills, I think, what Michael's getting at, and I agree, with the senders and receivers and how they leverage those tools effectively.
Yeah, I'm absolutely right. I mean, this isn't the only venue that you can use, but you can use, you can use FaceTime, you can use Knowledge Keeper. There's a whole bunch of ways. The thing is, we can be creative. So now in February of last year, somebody was told you can't have your cell phone at the job site. In March of this year, they were told, listen, we don't want you to use that cell phone unless you're calling us to get some clarification. So again, it's let's get together and manage it best for the person that needs the information.
So being really purposeful and deliberate about what's
it has to be, or what we call intentional communications.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, and one more. Robin brought up a point about the mental, physical health, brain, cognitive stuff that is going on with all of us, as we've never experienced before in the COVID world. So really taking that into consideration when we're training people, when we're coaching, when we're communicating, you know, really being aware of that.
No, that's a great point. You know, I use, for those of you who are on LinkedIn, I encourage you to hook up with Anna Faringa. She's a mental health expert out of Australia. And Anna's very, you know, she does very simple work, but she really turned me on to the mental health challenges and a discovery that COVID has just revealed what's always been there. It's just opened our eyes to what we should have been thinking about before. So it's vitally important that becomes a piece of it. The kind of cool thing about where we are now is you can almost incorporate that into your HOP elements and a way that you have the discussions. But like someone said, they have to be done right.
Awesome. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, Todd Conker kind of spilled the beans at the last in-person HPRCT that he and I were sitting in Stavanger, Norway, when we came up with this real drift model that then became the masters of the blue line. So remember, now more than ever, people are out there not doing your work as imagined and doing their work as done. But we don't have many opportunities to go check that. And we have to start talking about that as adaptability. And what are the limits of adaptability where we need a conversation or we don't need a conversation? Because the reality is, why do we call that a violation and we call that innovation? You know, if we're below the line, we say you violated the rule because you decreased the margin to safety. Well, they're both deviations. So how do we learn from each of those in a way that we don't necessarily call that a violation and a reduction in margin to safety, because that's all hindsight bias. But how do we deal with that? How do we analyze deviations and put those deviations that we analyze in a structure that anybody can do it? How do you almost automate the analysis of deviations where you then wind up more in the systemic failure piece so that they can fix problems? Then you've got those people that you were talking about, Dean, that are at home with their mind open and all the resources available that can then put some real fixes in place. So instead of doing 20 things that aren't going to work, they do 1 or 2 that probably will. So let's talk about some advantages in this new world. One of the advantages, the HOP concepts and science haven't changed. It's not like we got to go out and reinvent the science and concepts. All that's changed is the delivery and how we deal with it. We can now get leader involvement via electronics. So if you struggled with leaders being as involved as you wanted them or you felt like they needed to be before, that's all out the window, because we can do that via electronics. They think it's better for them and it's better for us. I love this one. The speed at which you can deliver HOP, the consistency with which you deliver HOP, and the ability to verify whether they got it has actually improved. Now remember, I was not that guy. I want to look you in the eye. I want to see that you got it. I still love today. The thing I miss the most is watching the light bulbs go off. I love watching light bulb come on. But just because I love it doesn't mean that's the only way people get it. You know, today we can do 100 or 1,000 people instead of 15 to 20 in the same period of time. We can provide what I call shorter burst accessibility. In other words, we don't have to gather people in for 4, 6, or 8 hours. We can give them short bursts that don't take up much of their day. So HOP is no longer a burden on some people. Oh, I've got to go to HOP training. Well, the HOP training was really, really good. Yeah, but that's after the fact. I don't dread that I get a video every Tuesday or Wednesday morning, and that video is something that I discuss with my crew, and then we now know that. It has instant availability to things like refreshers or just in time, 24/7. So if somebody wants to try to remember about traps and triggers, they just punch 2 buttons on their phone and they bring it up and they can have a conversation with their small organization about that. Because the people are now becoming more used to technological solutions. I guarantee you your grandmother FaceTimes. Guarantee it, because my grandkids' grandmother FaceTimes, and so do I. And even the ones that don't, they're now the minority, not the majority. A year ago, you may have had a majority of your seasoned employees. I don't need no cell phone. I don't need no this. I don't need no that. That was the exact voice that they used. But today, it's the only way they see their kids. It's the only way they can have conversation with their family members or their parents. Folks, See this as an opportunity, not time to fix a problem. We don't have a problem. We've got an opportunity to move HOP into this new world. Let me give you a couple of specific examples that I struggled with before. And the first one is that when I used to go out and talk to senior leaders and managers, I would educate them. I'd see the light bulb go on. I'd leave them with some things, and then they were going to hold themselves accountable. They like that word, right? To whether they did anything with it. So instead of being able to go in and do an 8-hour manager class, we now do a workshop that has a pre-online shop and then 3 1.5-hour sessions. Some organizations do it all in 1 week. Some do it every Tuesday at the same time for 3 weeks. But either way, they can now put 70 managers into a workshop that they were only going to put 15 in before. And by the way, we know how they answered the questions when we do the polls. We know whether they did their homework or not. So one of the very first ones we did had a conversation with the president of the company, and they had about 70 managers on. And I said, well, I hate to tell you this, but did you know that of your managers, only 22% of them passed the polling questions that were in the webinar? And I could see him on the Zoom meeting turn white. He said, what? I said, yeah, and we have some evidence that only about 25% of them decided to complete the homework to prepare for the next one. In the next one, that senior leader said, how can you ever go out there and think you can hold people accountable when you don't want to learn? We could never do that before. And the second and third of those webinars were game changing, because you can figure out if people are watching if you set your polling questions right. Because people still get the science, but it's not tainted. I'll give you an example. A utility had about 10 HOP coordinators. I'll just use that term. But all of them kind of taught the HOP materials their way. A couple of them had some different ideas on what some things ought to be called. So in this large, geographically diverse organization, there are about 8 different ways that these 10 HOP coordinators kind of taught the concepts. And everybody thought that was okay until all those groups had to come together in storm response. And the crews that got together in storm response for the different geographical locations, it was a bit of chaos because they weren't even using the same terminology. So this lets you use the same concepts the same way across a very wide geographic area and get the same results. And then there's technology solutions that are ready and available. We have a partner, and you can type in to the web Illumitask Ready, and the Am I Ready checklist comes up on your phone when you load that app, and it has background information on what performance mode am I probably in? Oh, skill-based, rule-based, knowledge-based. Here's the definitions. What tool should I use? Well, this is what tool that works for that. All that's built into this free app. So rather than going out and trying to invent, use some of the things that are already there. I'll have a link to our Fit Online for those of you who aren't members. It's free. You don't even need a credit card to sign up, but there are hundreds of things that you can do. So start looking at what's out there. Talk to the people about how you can help, even if it's like this. Get the leaders involved and keep them involved, either virtually, face-to-face if you can, on their phones. Make them use the technology and use what technology is available and network with each other. Folks, we have opportunities to do this anytime we want to. Anytime we want to. I appreciate that HPRCT put this together. But we need to be able to provide the right solutions, the right science, the right practical application under the right conditions to help people do HOP right. And I hope you're going to join me in doing that. We've been doing it now for about 8 months. we've completely shifted the way we do those things. And most of it is available right there online on .improvewithfit.com. Again, I'm not trying to market it, but because most of the stuff on there is free. But follow each other on LinkedIn. Ask those questions, and I hope this got your brains moving, and I wasn't just babbling about things you already know.
Love that, Rob, and I love that suggestion of connecting on LinkedIn and for people to be able to continue that dialogue and exchanging best practices and insights.
There's actually a hot group on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and a couple logistical things. We've got some questions. I will. So everybody's obviously got the URL out there right now on the screen, but we'll wrap that up after the session today with a follow-up email, to make sure everybody's got that. And a couple of questions. So first off, Bob Latino, your question.
Hi, Rob. Excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'm wondering the changes that you've seen with pre and post COVID is that typically it's very sensitive in a hop session to record something because you want the candor and the openness. But when you move to online, is there, from a leveraging of what you're learning, lessons learned, is there more openness to recording that for reflection on soak time and sharing the process with somebody else?
Yeah, well, there's a huge amount of receptiveness. We didn't record before because we were all sitting in a room and nobody liked to tape record.
Right.
Well, we're all pretty used to being recorded now. You just have to say how it's going to be used. So I'll give you a for instance. I did a socially distanced senior leaders session on Friday over in Knoxville. And we recorded the session because half of the people were virtual and half of the people were in the room. That would have never been recorded like that before, but now they can go back and watch it. Their IT folks can work with them on sensitivity. And what we do is we tell our clients, I'll record this for you if you want it. If you don't want it, we won't record it. And I can't count on one hand the number of times people have said, no, don't record it.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, and some of the liability type issues, Bob, that you deal with, that's a little bit different answer in some deep root causes. But in almost all learning opportunities, we're seeing that people appreciate that they can go back and look at it.
I was just wondering if it was more suppressed, if they thought that it was going to be recorded, would they be less open to participate?
I haven't noticed that, and perhaps the reason is, I'm brainstorming here. Perhaps the reason is when there's a tape recorder sitting in the middle of the room, everybody sees it. I forget about the record button about 12 seconds in.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks, Bob. And Michael Petrowski, you had a question, a couple of minutes ago. If you want to raise your hand, I can just unmute you and you could ask that live. So we'll just pause there, see if Michael wants to raise his hand and jump in there. And anybody else, any other questions that you might have, just feel free, raise your hand or type them into the Q&A box or the chat box.
And while they're doing that, Dean, look, y'all know how to get a hold of me. If you want more information or to have a chat about this offline, send me an email or call me. I'm completely open to having these discussions.
Brilliant. So looks like we have no more questions, Rob. And there was a great presentation and a great discussion. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. And have a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas and a happy Hanukkah and everything else.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Everybody be safe.